Trenton, are we good with live streaming? Trenton? Okay, we are good. Okay. I will start sharing the PowerPoint, Wesley, and then we can get started.
Okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our September 2021 Licensure Subcommittee meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for taking their time out of their busy schedules today to share your expertise and knowledge as we know that our work is complex and your personal work also is very complex, and we're all extremely busy, and it's hard to believe that we are already approaching fall. I think today is the first day of fall this year, and just thinking about our school year here in Wilkes, we're over 10% complete and approaching that 20% mark. So time is really flying by this year, and we've had multiple meetings up to this point. Miss Ann is not going to be able to join us today. She had a prior commitment, so I want everyone to know that as well. Kim has sent out the minutes from the August 18th meeting. I think she sent those out on August the 19th. Hopefully you've had a chance to review those and refresh yourself. And so at this time, let us entertain a motion to approve the August 18th minutes. Okay, have a second?
Chris Godwin.
Thank you, Chris. Do we have a second?
Maureen Stover, I second.
Thank you, Maureen. Also, you should have received a copy of the agenda for today's meeting. And one thing I did add to the agenda that I'm not sure Kim updated or not, but I'm having Melissa Tooley share a little bit later on about some additional information from last month's presentation. But I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Jill Camden, so moved.
Thank you, Jill. Do we have a second?
It's Oliver Hawley. I'll make that second.
All right, thank you so much. Just reflecting on last month's meeting, a couple highlights from the meeting. We had Melissa Tooley and Megan Comstock present a extravagant list of existing measures along with some research and findings. Our subcommittee began to really engage in some deeper discussion about those measures, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to look back over the presentation and the slides that Melissa shared with you to refresh yourself on some of the measures that we looked at. Those measures included licensure exams, observational measures, student surveys, measures of student learning such as EBOS, portfolios, along with micro-credentials. So Melissa sent out an email this afternoon with some additional information that we thought it would be important for you to be aware of as we go into our group discussions this afternoon. So Melissa, I want to turn it over to you and let you share that information with the committee as a follow-up from last month.
Sure. So the only major update that I made to the actual content.
Melissa, can you see your content?
I can. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
And it's on, I believe, slide 11. We had a conversation last month, about student surveys, and we went back and forth a little bit about how there wasn't a specific finding on the slide about the relationship of student surveys with other measures of teacher effectiveness or teacher competency. as the case may be. And so wanted to just update the slide to incorporate, there hasn't been a ton of research on this particular issue, again, that it has been done sort of by an outside entity, not the provider of the survey itself. But there was one really significant research study done that did find that the tripod student survey was highly correlated with value added as a measure of teachers' effectiveness, even more so than teacher observation ratings. And so just wanted to ensure that we had updated that slide to reflect that. And I know that some of you had also requested having the sources for all of the research and evidence that was included in here. And so it may not be as neat as you would find in like a research report, but if you go to the notes on the slides that were shared, you will be able to see all of the different sources that were used to pull this information from. And so if there are any questions, I'm happy to field them, or any things that people reflected on since our last meeting, happy to entertain those if that would be helpful as we get into our session today.
And we'll pause here just for a moment to see if anyone has any questions that they've thought of. They wanted to ask Melissa about her research from our last month's meeting. So we'll pause just for a few seconds. All right, Melissa, I think that was it. That was all that you were going to share? Okay, great. All right, next, if you remember, we had an August 20th joint subcommittee meeting with the preparation and entry committee. And I thought that meeting was very productive to understand a little bit where their committee's coming from and kind of where we need to go together as we are working on similar topics. I walked away from that meeting, just like me, feeling that we probably need to start putting some sort of rough draft together of a potential plan that we can begin working from. We spent several meetings now really understanding the background and the research of possibilities of looking at alternatives to licensure exams for content and pedagogy as far as moving from level 2 to 3. So today we are going to break up once again in subgroups. I think Kim has going to divide us into 5 different groups, and our goals are really to determine what measures of content do you as individuals on the committee feel is appropriate for content and pedagogy. And we're really not focusing on the specifics of how that may or may not work, but based on what you've learned so far about measures that have been presented, which ones do you find would be appropriate? So each group will have a Word document, and you'll have a list of potential measures on the left-hand side of that chart. And we would like for your group to discuss each of those measures and review them based on what you learned last month and what any additional information that you may know about those measures. And you're going to kind of rank those measures related to content and pedagogy. So the first breakout session will be specifically on content. So your group's focus is to determine which one of these measures would you either recommend as one category, strongly consider as a category, consider, or do not recommend. In other words, in your group, you may come to some consensus that, hey, this measure would obviously be a great recommendation for an alternative for content or pedagogy. You may feel that, for example, one measure is, would not work for content and should not be considered at all. So we'd like for you to have some discussion about each of those measures. Try to come to a consensus of, would your group recommend, strongly consider, or do not recommend that particular measure? But I think the main thing we'd like for you to focus on too is the reasoning behind that. So we'd like for you to add comments to that document at the bottom that we as a subcommittee can come back and reflect on and take further action if needed. So Andrew, I know you're also on the line with us today, and as we talked, you kind of helped create this forum here, and you may have some additional comments that you'd like to share with the subcommittee before we break out into those sessions. So I'll just give you an opportunity if you do.
Sure. Actually, I think this is you've explained it pretty well. I just want to encourage everyone to think outside the box. All I did here was lay out what was captured in previous meetings along the left there. But I don't want to limit any of the thinking to just those areas. So if you have other areas that you feel are important to contribute, make sure that you write them in the bottom there. I think that's really important. So again, we're just trying to capture some consensus around some of these areas, depending on the topic that we're discussing at the time.
Right. So if you're aware of another measure being used, whether it's another state, something that we as a subcommittee need to further investigate, definitely make notes of that on your chart, in your comments, and that will be definitely very helpful. So our first breakout session is going to be on content. So once again, you're asking yourself, which one of these measures, if any, would you consider for an alternative to licensure, as far as recommended, strongly consider, considering, or would not recommend at all. So Kim, I think you are going to divide us up into those 5 groups, and I'll turn it over to you to see if you have any additional directions and talk about our timeline of how long the groups have and when we'll reconvene for discussion and feedback.
So I've done mixed grouping within the 5 groups. And so you'll find in the SharePoint site a breakout session number 1 folder, and then a breakout session number 2 folder, and your groups will be numbered accordingly. So let me know if you have any questions. You can email me. Feel free to do that. If you're having trouble accessing anything with SharePoint, let me know that as well.
Okay. So once again, our goal is to have some, basically a draft when we're finished that we can bring back to the subcommittee. Ones that definitely we need to begin to put some action in place, and then others that we may feel may not be the ones that we have consensus as far as what we're looking for in each of those areas. So Kim, I'll turn it over to you to break us up in groups, and then we'll reconvene.
Great. Thank you.
just asking. Because materials, could that be used to satisfy content? I'm just going.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Sarah. I think I talked over top of you.
I think we're feeling the same thing. I'm not sure how we feel on the portfolio. So if anyone else has.
All right, Kim, I think we're back, right?
Yes, we are.
All right. We're going to go ahead and start our discussion from our groups. Couple things, if you would, make sure that if you have any questions or follow-up questions for members of the group that you jot those down, and we can definitely come back after each group has presented and have some discussion on those questions that you may have regarding someone's thinking. I would encourage our groups as they speak to really, if you can, elaborate on your reasoning of why you may recommend or strongly consider any of these measures that you have come to some consensus for. So we'll start with group one, and I think each group had a spokesman that they selected to share. So we'll turn it over to group one.
So group one ended up being distributed among the other groups.
Yeah, I think I saw there was just one, I think, in that group.
Right.
So yeah.
Go ahead with group two.
Yeah, group two.
This is Andrew. So this group was either all in on recommend or all in on do not recommend. So this is on the back end. So if you had a 3.0 in the content area, then you wouldn't necessarily have to take the performance-based assessment. If you didn't have a 3.0, but you did have content area coursework that was a C or higher, you could still play ball if you took the associated and corresponding performance-based assessments. So that was the caveat with that one. Under micro-credentials, they were all in on micro-credentials to recommend that, but they wanted to make sure that there was clarity around consistent, rigorous, and monitored micro-credential sort of ecosystem, as it were. In terms of student surveys, portfolio, aptitude assessment, and parent survey, they were not recommending any of those. The GPA as an alternative to an entrance exam, they were in favor of that and were in favor of the existing 2.7 GPA. They were not in favor of observation for pedagogy. Under credit hours for content, they liked the idea of credit hours for content, provided there was a level of proficiency in there. In other words, I can't take 10 content courses but fail them all. There was some interest in having maybe consideration for a higher expectation for secondary in their content area because it's a narrower area that they're navigating, as well as a strong math and reading effort for elementary and special ed classroom teachers. And that was our group.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew, for sharing a lot of good stuff on there. Just want to make just a few notes here real quick before we go to the next group.
Dr. Wood?
Yes.
This is Tom. Would it be possible for Andrew to share the page for that group? So it was hard to follow all the yeses or nos. Did they have it on the page that we could look at real quick?
Yeah, they should have put it on the Word document. Kim, I'm not sure. Can you share that from your side from the share folder?
If you can give me control, I can probably I can share it. Let me see if I can share it, guys. Hold on a second here.
I know we'll put this information in the minutes, but we also can share each of those Word documents as well. Of course, they're in the shared drive, so people can look at them at any time as well. But
I believe it's.
I think the main thing is making sure each group, effectively recording their notes on there.
All right, so I'm trying to share it right now. Can you guys see it?
Yeah. And Andrew, can you scroll down so we can see your notes there real quick?
Well, they're cooked in. The notes are cooked.
Oh, okay. I thought you might have put it down the bottom. Okay.
Yeah, we just added them in here.
Okay. And Kim, it may be good that we also to make a note of who the spokesperson is, maybe for each group. That way, as we come back and review these, if we have any follow-up questions of maybe what specific.
That will be in the minutes. For sure.
Okay. That way, if we can come back and look at it.
Sure.
All right. Just looking here at Brenda had a question. Andrew, I'll throw that to you. I was under the impression that performance-based materials was not a test, but rather evidence of effectiveness. That may be something Melissa may want to comment on as well from her research.
Hi. Everyone in our group was also sort of trying to get on the same page just about what these various pieces are. But my interpretation, just based on trying to align some of these terms with the presentation that we gave, was that performance-based materials align to performance-based assessments. So things like the TPA for early pre-service teachers and things like national board certification exams for later career teachers. So that was how my group at least interpreted this based on my own interpretation. But it would be actually helpful probably for folks to indicate how they were understanding these things. Like aptitude assessments, for example, we assumed were things like Praxis, but not sure that everybody made that same assumption. So
yeah, I would say our group was thinking the exact same way with regard to the performance-based materials.
Okay. And there may be others that we need to even research as well as we move forward about to have a potential list of that we could come back and further refine all those performance-based measures. But I agree with that. I think that's when we were in the planning meeting, that's kind of how we define those as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, group 3, we'll put you guys up, and Andrew, I'm not sure whoever's got control, if you can share their chart as well. That may be good before they start sharing.
let me try that again. I was trying to share my screen. Did you all see it?
We see your mouse moving around, but couldn't see actual display.
Anything on there? Okay. I will try one more time. Can you see that?
Yeah, it's just white on our
blank.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure why, but I'm just going to talk then, and
okay, go ahead,
it's in the drive if anybody wants to see it. So our group had sort of a conversation around performance-based materials where we felt more strongly about their use and recommending them for later career teachers. So things like, in particular, national board certification, because it is focused on specific content areas. People were not as, did not feel we should strongly consider it, but just consider it for earlier career teachers, things like TPA or other sort of vetted performance-based assessments. And that just being more about having, I think, largely about having fewer other tools to be able to measure content knowledge for later career teachers as opposed to for earlier career teachers. For micro-credentials, we put those in the strongly consider category, really more as an additional option rather than like the primary option, most likely, especially for areas where Praxis or other aptitude assessments wouldn't adequately capture content knowledge. So areas like computer science or sort of burgeoning areas like cultural responsiveness. And there's just one caveat that we need here, which is that clearly these would have to be high quality, sort of vetted by a central source that everyone felt confident that this micro-credential is going to actually reflect the candidate's content knowledge.
Okay.
Similar to the other group, student surveys, portfolios, and parent surveys were all in the do not recommend category, although aptitude assessments were in the recommend category. And this is talking specifically about the praxis test. For GPA, we talked about this more in combination with credit hours for content. So we put those basically together in the strongly recommend category, that if you have a high GPA in your content area and sufficient credit hours, then we would strongly recommend that as an alternative, but just GPA overall may not be reflective unless you do have that content area specificity. For example, having a high GPA as a theater major is unlikely to indicate whether you know math content. So trying to ensure those two pieces of content and GPA are connected. And then for observation for pedagogy, we have it in the consider category. We had a little bit of conversation about it really depends on whether whoever's doing the observing has substantive content knowledge themselves. In some cases, that's going to be true, and in other cases, it will not. And we ran out of time and didn't talk about anything else. No other options to suggest.
You guys had some great points. Awesome. All right, let's move on to group 4. And who is the spokesman for group 4?
That would be me, Amanda Maxwell from the University of Mount Olive. This is the wrong document. There you go. There we go. Okay.
Good deal.
All right. Thank you. All right. So beginning, taking a look, if you could scroll down just a little bit, and I'll start off with a clarifier. We felt down to the comment down at the bottom, as we move through these measures, we really began to ponder the question about where these measures fit in the different licensure areas. So are we thinking about entry? Are we thinking about moving to a higher license? Are we thinking about maintenance? So I think that with each measure, that's something that we need to consider. So scrolling back up to the top, the first measure was performance-based materials, and we were asking, just as everyone, this is talking about the PPAT, the EdTPA, EVOS data. If we're looking at entry level, we feel like we would strongly consider performance-based material, would definitely recommend if we're talking about moving to a higher license. Micro-credentials, we would certainly consider that if we're talking about moving to a higher license there. As you can see, I think we're all in consensus that student surveys, parent surveys should not be considered. We felt that aptitude tests would be another area that we would not recommend. We don't think that this is necessarily an indicator of an effective teacher. Portfolio, possibly strongly consider at the entry level. Many EPPs already have some sort of portfolio requirement as a part of their program, so this would not necessarily be something that would be new. Looking at GPA, just like a little clarification in regards to that measure. Are we talking about GPA in the content area? We just need some further information there.
Okay.
Observation for pedagogy, definitely for the higher level license there. We just need to think again where we would put this particular measure. Credit hours, the same thing. Where would we place this in moving through the levels? Are we talking about CEUs? Are we talking about college course credits? Would this be hours that would be sponsored by the district or the state? So basically that is where we are with group 4.
Okay. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing. And you brought up a lot of good questions I think we need to come back and define and have discussion on. Good job.
Thank you.
All right, group 5, I think that's the last group.
Hi, this is Maureen, and I will be doing the group 5. So we kind of had a different view take on the performance-based materials. Similar to group 4's questions, we were also wondering, like, what would that mean? And we thought that it meant artifacts that would demonstrate how students are doing in your classroom and how teachers are designing instruction that meets students' unique individual learning needs while ensuring the remaining standards aligned in their lessons. And so we kind of had a slightly different view take on that from many of the other groups. But we thought that, with that, it's very important that you must include the self-reflection piece. So we need to help teachers understand how to look at how they're teaching, what they're teaching, how that's working with their students, and being able to reflect and find places where they can continue to grow and continue to improve their teaching practice. Another thing that we were thinking about is that if you go down to the observations, we did recommend observations, but we highlighted that it needs to be done by somebody who is qualified to do those observations. Will be able to help the teacher identify places where they can continue to improve, while also identifying areas of strength for the teacher. But what happens when there's a mismatch between what the observer or the reviewer thinks about the teacher's teaching practice and their ability to be an effective teacher and the teacher's viewpoint? And so using those performance-based tasks as part of the whole picture maybe gives the teacher an opportunity to say, I realize that my principal or my department head or whoever was doing my observation thought that, I didn't have something that I needed in my lesson, but here's an example of the activity I did with my students the following day that demonstrates that I did include that as part of my lesson design. So we thought maybe it would be an opportunity for teachers to demonstrate how they are being effective teachers. And then also with that, we thought, one of the places where we see some real opportunity here is with those observations is leveraging some of the examples that we've seen coming out of the pilot programs with the advanced teaching roles to really utilize those teachers that are in still a classroom teacher, but have moved into a leadership position where they can go into classrooms and provide those observations with some immediate feedback, or maybe help a teacher during the lesson as being that guide on the side to help them develop a lesson while they're teaching, where they can recover a lesson that's maybe not going as they wanted it to, or help them so that they're improving their teaching practice in real time. And so we thought that might be really effective as well. For the micro-credentials, Kim, if you want to go back up to the top. For the micro-credentials, we still had a lot of questions about exactly how those would work. We do think that they would be very effective and would give a great opportunity for teachers to be able to build on some skills and to be able to develop a learning system that would work well for them to really help them expand in their understanding of content, pedagogy, teaching practice, any area where they are working on their relicensure, but we just still have a lot of questions about how that would look. We definitely agree with Melissa's group that would have to be something that's highly vetted and that has some oversight so that we are ensuring that those micro-credentials are going to be effective in helping the teacher to improve in their teaching practice. I guess we were kind of the odd man out here on the student surveys. We were split within our group on whether we should recommend those or strongly consider. Brenda pointed out that there's quite a bit of research that indicates that student surveys are very reliable and objective. And while you will have some outliers, those would be thrown out in the analysis process. And so you do get some really good feedback and some really good information using those student surveys. One of the things I brought up as a practicing classroom teacher is that my students are essentially my customers. And if I am not helping my students learn in a way that they consider to be positive for them, or that they consider to be worth their time to be in my classroom, then I'm not doing my job. And if I consistently was getting feedback from my students that I am not doing a good job in instructing them, then that's a clear indication for me to look at my teaching practice and identify places where I can do a better job of meeting my students' needs. So that's kind of where we were looking at with the student surveys. With the portfolio, we did put that in do not recommend because we felt like the portfolio is really the thing that might get you the interview. So showing your portfolio might be the thing that gets you your foot in the door, but your portfolio is not going to be what gets you the job, and it's definitely not going to be what gets you the promotion. So we felt like, well, that's something that many teachers probably will develop and take with them as they go into job interviews or as they're leaving their EPP and looking for those initial placements in school districts. That might be helpful for them. We didn't necessarily think that was something that needed to be included in the licensure process. For the aptitude assessments, we also, again, had a different view take on these. We did not think that that was referring to standardized tests, ACTs, or SAT type tests, or the praxis. We thought that that meant that it was the skills that teachers would need to be effective instructors, such as being able to multitask, being able to differentiate instruction, being able to develop lessons from the standards and then translate that into lessons that are effective for their students. And so we kind of took a little bit of a different viewpoint on that aptitude assessment. And so for that reason, we said strongly consider, because we do think that would be very helpful in determining whether or not a teacher is doing a good job with their students. For the parent surveys, again, we were split there, and it goes back to kind of the same things we were saying about the student surveys. The parent surveys, and Brenda, if I have this wrong, please correct me, but are maybe not quite as reliable and objective as the student surveys. But still you do get good information from them. And again, if a teacher is struggling to communicate or to be able to work with parents, then maybe that's something that does need to be considered and something that needs to be part of them improving their teaching practice and their reflection process. For the GPA, we said maybe as a minimum requirement. We know that within high school age kids, within college age students, that GPA doesn't really necessarily predict really how good they are in school. I mean, you could have two kids that both have a 3.0 GPA, and one of them could be a stellar teacher and the other one may really struggle. We also identified that many times the people who were not good students can be an extraordinary teacher. And so we didn't want that GPA to be something that would maybe limit someone from an opportunity to move into a classroom. We did not have a chance to get to the credit hours for content. And then the only other thing that we just wanted to bring up is that we did have a concern with who is making the decision about what is good enough. We really need to know who is the person, if we're looking at performance packs and micro-credentials and student surveys and aptitude tests, who is it that's going to be making that determination of whether or not a teacher is doing what they need to do? And we just need to make sure that that person or that group of people is making that decision in the best interest of the kids who are in our classrooms.
Wow, Maureen, you guys did a very good, thorough analysis. We appreciate all the feedback, particularly on your comments about aptitude testing and the performance-based measures. I know just from your group's comments, it made me think of things that I really hadn't thought of before. But Melissa, I had a question for you there. Were you guys specifically evaluating the tools for content, or was it a mixture of content and pedagogy? Because some of your comments kind of implied both. I was just curious.
So we weren't really differentiating at this level between those two. We were just kind of focusing on overall teacher effectiveness. Okay. And so no, we didn't really hone in on either or. I mean, we could if that would be helpful, but we didn't. Okay. And then also Brenda said that parent surveys versus student surveys, there's a concern that parent perspective is secondhand and therefore it's not as reliable, just to add into what I had said about the parent surveys. Yeah, that's a good point. And, in regards to aptitude assessments and performance-based, measures, I think the door's open for, various interpretations of what that could be. And that's the neat part about this is that, we have the flexibility to investigate further. So those are some great comments.
Can I just add one thing? Sure. I just want to, I guess, maybe caveat. I'm not sure. We read the instructions as asking us to focus on content specifically. So I just want to say that that is, I think our feedback, if we were looking at it sort of holistically, like all the different elements of the teacher's need to be effective, I think our group would have had different responses, and that was actually a part of our conversation. And so I just want to make sure that we didn't do it wrong, because I think we would have different, we would have written down different things if we were talking about sort of other elements like pedagogy and application of
right
content.
And I think, and somehow, Kim, we can record in the notes, particularly with Group 5, that theirs was, a mixture of both. And, Maureen, we can actually may reach back out to you and ask you if you can fine tune it just strictly to content and pedagogy. If you guys have an opportunity to further clarify, it may just help the group as we form the draft for further conversation. But, yeah, thanks, Melissa. And where our goal for the first session was to really focus on strictly content. However, when you get to talking and discussing, one comment leads to another thought so it's very easy to because many of them do overlap so much in different areas. We do want to spend our remaining time and also have a follow-up group breakout session where we want to do the same activity, except we want to focus it strictly on pedagogy so that we can have hopefully a draft for content and a draft for pedagogy to come back with further conversation. And I know that you guys have already spent a lot of time talking in your first session, so this next one probably will not take you guys that long at all, because your thoughts, once again, will probably overlap in what you put down. So this time we're going to go ahead and break out into our second group and ask you to, and Kim, I don't know if we can we keep the same groups that we had before? That it may have that conversation.
It will be the same group.
Okay, yeah, great, because I'm sure you've already discussed once again many of the pieces of pedagogy as well. But so with this time we'll break out into our second group so that we can have time for you guys to talk again and come back and share before our time's up. So this time we would like our groups once again to focus on the pedagogy piece and looking at these possible measurements. So Kim, if you want to go ahead and break us out.
So we had 40 minutes for this. Do you want to cut that in half?
Yeah, I think, I'm thinking maybe 15, 20 minutes, maybe. And then let's go 20. And then I think since we've already shared so much, we probably won't have a whole lot additional to add, but let's do 20 on that.
Okay.
Hey, Kim.
Yes.
Hey, can they hear us in the chat rooms if we're talking out here?
No.
All right. Wesley, are you there?
I'm here.
Hey, so just an observation that I'm glad the whole content versus pedagogy question came up because that helps clarify some of the responses we got. I think what this is surfacing for this group, and maybe we want to talk with the larger group about it, is it seems to me that measuring content knowledge or determining content knowledge in the what we call the authentic setting, in the classroom. And this is really what we're trying to get at with a lot of this is can we determine these things exist in the classroom setting? All these things, with the exception of the final group, which blended content and pedagogy, everything's external to the classroom. And maybe that's due to us or the staff not providing some options that may help situate that measurement in the classroom. I don't know, but it just struck me that everything was pretty much external and not a lot of and pretty in line with what we have now.
Well, that's what I was going to say, Tom, was that I think probably the reason they went that direction is just because it's the norm now.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's what it needs to be, but I observed the same thing, or thought about the same thing as well.
So maybe, and Andrew did a great job in putting these things together, and I think it's really helpful to put things in front of them and have them react to it. I think this was a really good exercise. But what I'm, hold on 1 second. Hi. Can you hang on 1 second? Is maybe Kim and Andrew and I can brainstorm about are there things that we can do, ways that we can think about this that would put this more in the practice realm rather than in the outside of the classroom realm. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think all the follow-up questions obviously are really, really important. Just like who's evaluating those measures. If it's an observation in the classroom, does the person have the essential skills? But at the same time, I could easily see a series of observations done by a peer teacher who is a master teacher in a specific content, who is licensed in that area, things like that, doing some of those inside the classroom observations, or even the performance-based materials that Maureen mentioned. There's planning, but there's also making sure there's measures in place to understand that the teacher knows how to, or understands how to teach the content. Like we've had this discussion with math and the different praxis tests already available. So those are some good points.
All right, Kim, I've got some people at my door, so I'm gonna go on mute. I don't know when I'll be back.
Okay.
All right.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We will continue with Group 2, moving forward and discussing your overall thoughts regarding the measures presented before you, along with any others that you would like to share in the area of pedagogy. And so let's see if you have any additional thoughts from your first sharing, specifically directed towards pedagogy. So Group 2, actually, I'm sorry.
All right, this is Andrew. I'm trying to share my screen. You're sharing my screen, Kim? I'm so confused. You realize they only hear me right now. They don't hear me and you having a discussion. I'm trying. All right, can you guys see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So here we are in the pedagogy area. Our small but mighty group was strongly recommending performance-based materials, specifically around, they noted EdTPA, PPAT, and national boards. They were recommending the use of micro-credentials, again, for the same reason, the caveat from the same discussion earlier, and that's that this is all provided that the micro-credentials have proper vetting and good sequence content and stacking. They were opposed to student surveys. They were opposed to portfolios. They actually did think that portfolios might be useful in earlier stages, but they're of less value in the more veteran and seasoned stages. They were opposed to aptitude and parent surveys. They were not as opposed to, but definitely had some concerns about leveraging GPA as an alternative to an entrance exam when you're thinking about the pedagogy side of things. The observation for pedagogy was recommended. And again, that was provided there's consistent and ongoing training of the use of that observation system. They wanted to strongly consider using credit hours for pedagogy. They like the idea of using credit hours to navigate both content and pedagogy, and provided that there's a balance there. And that was our group.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Yep.
Group 3.
I'm gonna see if someone else wants to try to share our document, since that didn't work so well for me last time, but I can start walking us through it. So for performance-based assessments, we recommended those, so specifically National Board at TPA, and we also talked about EVAS being a measure of performance, even if isn't necessarily a performance-based assessment. And we also talked a bit about how these three types of, these three particular performance-based measures are really about the intersection of content and pedagogy. They aren't, solely measuring pedagogy, but really about the application of their pedagogical and content knowledge together. And we also said we should strongly consider micro-credentials, but really as sort of another option, not as like the sole option, especially for areas that might not be captured through other means. I gave the example of cultural responsive pedagogy being one where current, for example, observation rating rubrics might not currently capture that, because cultural responsive pedagogy sort of entered into the mix after those rubrics had been created. And so there's a lot of sort of burgeoning, emerging areas like that in pedagogy that would be particularly useful for micro-credentials. And the caveat, again, being that they have to be high quality. For student surveys, we saw this as being a complement to other measures. It wouldn't be the sole measure, but it can add important information to teachers' pedagogy. And again, based on the research that I mentioned earlier, we do see that student surveys are correlated with other measures of teacher effectiveness. Portfolios, same comment that we made on content, that if we're going to look to artifacts of practice to assess pedagogy, it's better to use a performance-based assessment that has a more standard way of scoring. If we're looking at a high stakes thing like licensure, whereas like a portfolio for just ongoing professional development is great, but probably not for making a sort of move up kind of decision in teachers' career paths. We said we would not recommend aptitude assessments, parent surveys, or GPA. And we are also a little bit, I think, confused about just the wording here because it says like as an alternative to entrance exams for GPA. But we kind of went back and forth a little bit about, well, could you have GPA in your content? In your GPA in your pedagogical coursework as one of the elements that we would consider, but ultimately decided that those courses vary so much between different institutions, both in number and in content, and that there's so much actually easier ways and probably better ways to assess pedagogy, which ultimately is about practice, not about, scores on something, whether you can answer a multiple choice test. So, and then the last one was observation for pedagogy. We said, that if observers have strong pedagogical knowledge themselves, particularly in the teacher's specific content area, and has sufficient training and checks on narrator reliability, we would strongly recommend it. We also know that is currently not always the case. And so a pretty strong caveat there, but like has a lot of potential, just isn't currently set up to probably do this again for like a high stakes type of decision like licensure. Again, great for sort of ongoing feedback and ongoing development, but probably not for making a sort of up-down decision.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa, for sharing. Group 4.
Okay, I think that's going to be me again. In looking at pedagogy here, again, we certainly would consider performance-based materials, but need more definition regarding what are these materials. Micro-credentials, what is the micro-credential? What is the focus and desired outcome? Certainly, if it's focused on pedagogy, we would definitely recommend this specifically for the higher license. Student surveys, we were not in favor of student surveys, aptitude assessments, or parent surveys. The portfolio, we were in agreement with one other group, talked about how portfolio may be tied to another measure, such perhaps the performance-based materials. And we feel like this would be appropriate for higher license. GPA as an alternative to entrance exam, just clarification on how this would be related to pedagogy. Observation, we recommend that specifically for the higher license. Credit hours for content, is this professional development focused on pedagogy? We would definitely want to consider that. And then just an overall comment, we feel like pedagogy is more appropriate as we consider it as a measure for higher license. And that's group 4.
Okay. I appreciate that last comment because that's why I was getting ready to ask you if my assumption that they all related more to higher levels of experience. Okay.
Yes, sir. That was the consensus of group 4.
All right. And our last group, group 5.
Brenda, did you want to present this time or you want me to go? I guess I'll go. Okay. Since we goofed up the last time and didn't really separate the content from the pedagogy, we this time focused on the content. So this is kind of a catch up from our last one. So I apologize that we messed up on the first go round. We did put our notes in already to clarify and separate content from pedagogy. So that's in the notes on the share drive. Let's see, I think this is, if you could scroll down to the next one down, please. or because we did them backward. I guess the one up. I'm sorry, the one that's above that. Oh, it's because we did it on the other one. Okay. I can just kind of talk through what we did. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks. There we go. Okay. So for the performance-based materials, we did think still that using those artifacts would be important, but that if we're using them for content, that the lesson plans or the learning resources and learning materials would need to clearly demonstrate content knowledge. So we need to embed in there that demonstrate the teacher understands the content that they are teaching. We also thought it'd be really important to be able to demonstrate that teachers are able to answer questions related to the content, or to explain something in a different way, if a student doesn't understand the first explanation, to have a good enough understanding of their content that they're able to explain that concept, or they're able to explain that phenomenon in a different way to help the student understand what they were discussing in their class. And so it would have to be very caveated if we're talking about content, but that we did think there were some ways to embed those performance-based materials. For the micro-credentials, again, kind of on our first conversation, we still have a lot of questions about how that would work. One of the members of our group, Virginia, had some really great insight, though, that she said, you do have teachers that are phenomenal teachers that are doing a really great job working with students, and they're highly effective with their students, but for whatever reason, they're really struggling to pass the licensure exam, the praxis or the foundations of reading, or they're just having some trouble passing those licensure exams. So micro-credentials could be a really great avenue to help reduce some of those barriers for teachers that are really extraordinary teachers, but for whatever reason are struggling to pass those standardized tests. For student surveys, we did go ahead and leave that one in as strongly considered, but again, we caveated that the way that the questions are asking, it must reflect back to the teacher's ability to teach the content. And maybe in some of those ways it might be is the content engaging, or different ways that you would ask those questions but directly related to the content. For the portfolio, we put that in the do not recommend. For aptitude tests, we did put that in the consider, but said that perhaps you would really want to add into that. And again, we were looking at the aptitude tests as the things that teachers would need to be effective at doing in order to be really good teachers. So if we were using part of the content in that, then we would really want to find out, like, do you love what you teach? Do you love math? Do you love science? Do you love English? Whatever it is that you're teaching, do you really have a passion for that content area that you're teaching that is what drives you to want to share your knowledge with the students in your classroom? And if you could scroll up a little bit, please. Oh, sorry, the other way, like there. Thank you. Yep, perfect. For the parent surveys, we did leave that one in for consider. Again, it is secondhand knowledge, and so it may not be as valid, but just to kind of get an idea of, do the parents of your students think that you're doing a good job giving information to their kids? The GPA, we did say for content, we thought that might be important, because that would be, especially if you're coming in on a license where maybe you didn't go through a traditional education program. Like, for instance, my degree was in aerospace physiology. If I did well in aerospace physiology, that would mean that I would be good at teaching other types of science because I had a high GPA and I understood what I learned in college. So we were kind of thinking that that might actually be a good measure of content to at least consider. The observations, we thought that the observer could still see things about your ability to understand the content and relate the content to your students. But because this one specifically said for pedagogy, we were thinking that probably that would be in the do not consider column, because they would be observing for content that they're not necessarily looking at your teaching practice if they're looking for your content knowledge. Credit hours for content, we did say that one should be considered. And then again, just that concern of who is making the decisions, we really need to kind of hone in on that.
All right. Great job, Maureen. And you guys, you didn't mess up before. You just were overachieving. So, all right. So today we've heard 4 groups share some beginning recommendations on at least the measures that have been presented before us. So we'll have a planning meeting coming up soon in which we'll begin to compile some of this data for further discussion and try to figure out some ways that we can get some additional questions from the subcommittee, get some additional answers hopefully for you, and maybe some examples and further explanation for, especially for the ones that groups continuously ask for further explanation. I think that's definitely important. I'll just in the last few minutes open the floor up if anyone has any general overall thoughts or comments about our activities today that they would like known to the group before our next meeting. So I'll open the floor if anyone has any specific comments or for the group. And if not, once again, I thank you for your time today. We spent almost 2 hours together and some great discussion about the measures that's been presented before us, and so that we can prepare to continue to move forward. I know your time's valuable, so we definitely appreciate you continuing to come back month after month and be not just a participant of the subcommittee, but an active participant. I think our next meeting is October the 20th, Kim, if I remember correctly. I think that's on a Wednesday. At least that's what I have on my calendar, unless that changes, but we'll definitely get the invites out to you regarding that. But this time, I think I'll make a motion that we adjourn our meeting for September. And if anyone would like to entertain that motion.
Second.
All right, do I have a second?
Second.
All right. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we will reconvene in October. Have a great afternoon, everyone.